Karen Reed of striking her boyfriend, Boston police officer John O'Keefe, with her car after a night of drinking and leaving him in the snow to die. The defense is saying, as they said in their opening statement, that Karen Reed was framed and this is all a cover up. Well, the morning of day 22 into week 7 of evidence of the Commonwealth versus Karen Reed brought us finally the end of Trooper B's testimony. Most of the cross-examination was about that being flipped, and the defense admitted a video that they had flipped back, which was much easier for my brain to process when we rewatched all of the Sally Port video with the video being flipped back, so that the driver's side was very clearly the driver's side based on the way that the car was pointing. I found that incredibly helpful, but that was a defense exhibit brought in on a thumb drive. Then we got into the Dighton police sergeant, who was the highest ranking officer on duty on January 29th, who responded to Karen Reed's parents' home when Trooper B and Trooper Proctor went out to Karen Reed's parents to seize the car and to seize the cell phone and to talk to Karen Reed. The most important part of his testimony, and there was no cross-examination to this witness, was that the taillight had a crack and a small piece missing. That was his observation of Karen Reed's taillight before it was loaded up onto the flatbed and towed back to Canton PD to be kept in the warm Sally Port with the terrible video. And then the state called Trooper Proctor, who at the lunch break is still on direct examination, but I think at the end of direct examination, because they are now asking about his relationship with the Alberts, how he knows them, his relationship with his sister, and the rest of it. We went through the whole morning in a more truncated way than with Trooper B. And the testimony really was that they saw the taillight and the taillight was damaged and it was missing. They showed the ring footage from John O'Keefe's home again, saying, look, this is the damaged taillight, though as Karen Reed's car is pulling away, the entire taillight is not gone. There is still quite a lot of red there. So when you come on the heels of the Dighton police officer, there was a crack and a small piece missing. That seems more consistent with the ring footage than the entirety of the taillight being missing. They also brought the physical evidence, the taillight casing, and all of those large pieces of taillight into evidence. Talked about going back out to 34 Fairview. As the weather changed, more evidence would reveal itself. That was his words, also Trooper B's words about it. And then we just started getting into Trooper Proctor's relationship with the Alberts. We have not gotten to cross-examination yet. I imagine we will get to that today and probably not finish that today. We also saw additional Sally Port video that was incredibly dark and hard to see from February 1st when crime scene techs were processing Karen Reed's vehicle. They also talked about the fact that the camera is motion operated and it does jump in time. In the end of the cross-examination with Trooper B, it became clear that there was about 5 minutes of Sally Port video, but the time span was over 45 minutes in like IRL time, but the video only captured about 5 minutes of footage. But the in real time 45 minutes versus what we saw on both the camera that was super dark and the camera that was inverted. On the camera that was super dark, there was about 40 minutes of time that wasn't shown. And we never see on the camera that is super dark, Karen Reed's vehicle being brought into the Sally Port. That super dark footage is the footage that would show the back of the SUV that we saw on February 1st. And there is a gap in time. But if it's, motion activated, why wouldn't the motion of bringing the SUV in trigger that motion activated camera? We got into it again with Trooper Proctor that there is no video from the ring footage of Karen coming back to John O'Keefe's home after being at 34 Fairview and dropping him off. And the officer or Trooper Proctor, it seemed really wanted to say that they believe that that had been deleted, but the court very swiftly sustained the defense objections. The defense objected several times, and those objections were very, very swiftly sustained. Well, this afternoon, we surprisingly got into the cross-examination of Trooper Proctor, but that wasn't the most shocking part of this afternoon. It's that the prosecution went through quite a few of Trooper Proctor's, how did he call them? Unfortunate text messages, unprofessional text messages. I have other words for those text messages because a lot of them were absolutely horrific. From the investigating officer, what you don't need is to be name calling the defendant, including dropping the see you next Tuesday word, joking with your chain of command that there are no nudes yet, talking about the defendant's medical conditions, talking about the defendant being hot but having no ass and a weird accent, among other things. Immediately in the early part of the cross examination, Alan Jackson made the point of saying, "You weren't objectively investigating my client, you were objectifying my client." Trooper Proctor kept looking to the jury saying these are unprofessional and unfortunate text messages. It went beyond that. He called her a whack job. There were other words that he used for crazy. He also tried to distance himself. At one point, the text messages seemed to indicate he was talking about the victim, John O'Keefe. He did nothing wrong, and she hit him with her car. I think he said she waffled him and then went on to describe that in his high school friends group texts. But he then said, no, when I was saying he did nothing wrong, I was talking about Brian Albert, which doesn't even make sense with when the time of the text messages were. And then as he was talking about somebody being wacko or what have you, I think the prosecution asked who he was referring to. It seemed to me he was referring to the medical examiner, but he kept saying he was referring to Karen Reed. He was texting with his supervisors in one group text that the medical examiner, they laid the whole case out for her, and she didn't come back with a homicide determination. And one of his supervisors said, rookie move. And they were talking about the determination or the undetermined determination for the manner of death that the medical examiner came up with. We've gotten so far past the testimony about the medical examiner at this point and very well into the name calling, the derision, and the kind of abject disdain that this investigator held for the defendant and her defense attorney, Yannetti. As the investigator Proctor was going through the defendant's phone, which is a whole nother level of what the because it didn't seem he was going through an imaged drive of the phone or that the phone was extracted or downloaded. It seemed he was going through her physical phone after it was cracked. Yes, pursuant to a search warrant. You don't go through the physical phone, not imaged, not mirrored, not an extraction, but going through the defendant's physical fucking phone. He was talking about how much he hated Mr. Yannetti and that he had came across text messages between Karen Reed and Yannetti from January 29th and had to stop searching the phone and send it out to a taint attorney or to a taint board who is going to go through and make sure there's no attorney-client confidential information, pull that attorney-client information out, give that attorney-client information to the defense, give the police back anything but the conversations between Yannetti and his client, Karen Reed. And it was just wild testimony, that the DA was eliciting from the case agent, i.e. lead investigator in that case, who seems to hate the defendant from the earliest stages of this investigation. It's actually worse than it was made out to be in opening statements. I think the defense has tried to say, you were telling people you were searching for nudes, and he's parsing, no, I told them no nudes yet. But is it going to matter with the stacks of other text messages where he's talking to his wife about the case, he's talking to his sister about the case, he's talking to his sister about witnesses in the case, he's got group texts with his high school friends talking about the case, including saying, well, the homeowner is going to catch some heat about the case, and he says, nope. Homeowner's a Boston PD cop too. He's talking to everyone about this investigation. And we're going to hear all of those text messages when we resume cross-examination on Wednesday. And I hope that Jackson puts them up on the board and just starts going through them. But again, I am left struggling to find how the prosecution made the decision to go to trial on this case, knowing that this was what was coming with their lead investigator. I don't know how you make that decision. And now we know why they left it for so long. You know who we still haven't seen yet, though? The medical examiner. For deep dives into the stories that I covered here, you can find them on my YouTube channel at The Emily D. Baker and The Emily Show Podcast.